So there's an interesting argument for Christianity that I find makes me raise my eyebrows. There's an image on a cloth, supposedly of Jesus, and it's a man that has been beaten, and his hands are pierced, his side is pierced, and there's blood coming from him, and he's been beaten and bruised. Interesting enough, this cloth is it's a negative image on the cloth that you can only see the positive when you take a photograph of it and look at the negative image, creating a false positive. I'm sure you've heard of this before. It's the Shroud of Turin. Roll intro. Little is actually known about the Shroud of Turin before 1390, when Bishop Pierre d'Arcis wrote a letter to the Pope asking for a cease and desist of people being charged money to come view the shroud at the local church. In fact, in his letter to the Pope, Bishop d'Arcis said that the artist who had created the shroud had already confessed. Now, I do find this a little dubious because any unnamed artist that has confessed during the time of the Inquisition, that could just be made up bullshit. However, this is the actual first recorded instance of the shroud. Now, it could have existed prior to this instance, as is evident by people paying money to go visit it. So I would say maybe 20 to 50 years prior to this, we can safely assume the shroud existed where it was first discovered. Also, the shroud does not appear to be painted without any brush strokes or pigment that we can tell. It's imprinted, but more on that later. One of the issues is that at the time and before then, there were actually several shrouds, including some of just the head cloth that supposedly covered the head of Jesus, also known as Veronica's veil. And there were a couple other cloths just floating around, including one that was owned by a French knight, de Cléry, that had supposedly the image of Jesus on it. Maybe not just the image, maybe just his head. There was an 8-foot long one. The Shroud of Turin is a 14-foot long one. These are contradictory and conflicting ideas of miraculous shrouds, including the image of Odessa that some people claim is the Shroud of Turin, but which might not have even been a cloth or even a picture of Jesus. I'll leave some relevant links in the description down below, though. So while it's possible that the cloth could date back before the 13th century, we don't have any conclusive proof that it does so. However, after the 15th century, that's the 1400s for you troglodytes out there, we do actually have a very good history of the cloth. In 1532, there was a fire that caused molten silver to drip down onto the folded pieces of the fabric, burning a symmetrical pattern all the way through. Now, this was repaired by the Poor Clares. In 1694, it was repaired again and again in 1868. Then, in 1983, the family that had owned the cloth donated it to the Holy See, the Vatican, the Catholic Church. Dudes, pony hats, and children fucking. Those people. And in 1988, there was radiocarbon dating done on the shroud. And in 2002, there was a full restoration of the shroud conducted. And currently, actually, this year, 2015, it is on display up until June 1st, I believe. So how old is the shroud, really? Well, that seems to be the area of some debate. In 1988, an independent team of researchers from the University of Arizona, University of Oxford, and the Swiss Institute of Technology conducted radiocarbon dating on a sample piece from the shroud, and they concluded conclusively with 95% accuracy that the shroud was dated from 1260 to 1390 AD. This actually goes very well in line when the shroud was first documented in history in 1390. Oddly enough, it's not the radiocarbon method dating that's called into question, but the sample that is called into question. Some opponents like to say that the sample that was used was part of the burned and then later on repaired portions of the Shroud of Turin from 1532. However, the researchers took great pains not to go from any area that was even close to a damaged part of the shroud. Some proponents also claim that there was a part of the shroud that was an invisible repair, in order it was done so well that you could not see that it was a repair done by a master and skilled repairer. Unfortunately, in 2002, the researchers on the restoration shroud said that any such of invisible repairs would have been completely visible to our modern technology with our microscopes and our testing. And in fact, the 1988 team took pains to make sure that the shroud fragment that they had matched the rest of the shroud, especially the parts with the image. So, conclusively, it dates back 1260 to 1390. Now, there are a few other objections, including some devotees saying that pollen found in the shroud only comes from a specific place in the world. Usually Jerusalem is what they claim. There are some say that there are from Turkey or something like that, trying to link it to this Declarii night. However, if that is true, and let's just assume that it is for now, we don't know when the pollen got there, who placed it there, how it got there. Hell, it could have been someone pollen on their clothes, walking in, viewing the shroud, and it got off onto the shroud. We've seen instances of people coming up with strange diseases that only existed in rare parts of the world, and they had never visited those parts of the world, and yet they came down with these weird diseases. Things travel. I mean, if you haven't heard the old expression, coins travel, it's amazing how things walk around the world. And I'm betting pollen would be pretty easy. But hey, that's just me. Also, interestingly enough, we know what kind of burial cloth they used in the 1st century. We found some of them. In fact, we found quite a few of them. And they use a very, very basic double weave. Very simple. And for all of you weavers out there, you'll know what that means. I have no idea what that means. That's what I found out doing research. Double weave. But I do know that a herringbone weave, which is what the Shroud of Turin is made out of, is a much more advanced weave. And it's a later weave, too, that doesn't show up until after the, the 11th century? The 1000s, 1000. So, around the time of 1260 to 1390. But that would be a little too coincidental and, I don't know, conclusively proving that the radiocarbon dating is accurate. But what do I know? Every single possible conjecture, and some of them wildly contradictory, have been proposed in an attempt to assert the validity of the shroud. And every single one of them has failed spectacularly and conclusively. But the most spectacular and dismal failure of them all is when people claim that the image itself is miraculously imprinted on the cloth. And this one fails because of the sheer volume of ways that medieval artists, using the technology and tools that they had at the time, could have produced the exact same thing on the shroud. In fact, there are several ways that you could go about it, and I'll leave some relevant links in an interesting video in the description down below. In fact, there's even a theory that Leonardo da Vinci faked the whole thing as a sort of pious prank, kind of a nudge in the ribs to the people that know. And while I do love this theory, unfortunately, I don't think it's true because he was born after the fact of the shroud being discovered. Sadly, he totally would have done something like that. I could totally see him doing that. However, if you do want to create your own shroud, I can tell you how. It's very simple. Get a pane of glass and paint a picture of Jesus fucked up beyond all imagine. Use color, blood, everything, but paint it lightly. Then go get a piece of linen cloth and place the linen cloth underneath the glass and angled out in the sun for several hours. The sun will actually bleach the linen cloth that's not covered by the shadow of the painted image. There will be a little bit of bleaching if you paint it lightly enough, and you'll get a very similar image to the Shroud of Turin, including when you photograph it, the negative image will be your false positive. This was also available to medieval artists. In fact, it was well known. It's the beginning of the world's first cameras. So you could almost say that the Shroud of Turin was the first photograph of a painting. An evolution from there to here in this camera. It's pretty cool when you think about it. Unfortunately, that's all it is. It's not a miraculous image of some god man that got the shit kicked out of him on some crucifix thousands of years ago. It's an ingenious, but nonetheless pious forgery. And if you honestly think that this is proof of God, your arguments are failing, and so is your faith, obviously. It's a dying lifeline that you're desperate to grab onto. It's too easily explainable. That's it, folks. That's the Shroud of Turin. As cool as it is, it really doesn't deserve much more than this shitty little video here. I'll leave some interesting reads down in the description down below. You all have a good one. Shroud of Turin. God, what the fuck? Just like my penis slowly drooping.
Alright.
Just can't keep it up! Because you can't keep a good dog down. Ish. Redo!
Redo!
Fuck a cunt monkey! Redo all that fucking bullshit monkey bitch ass shit.
Awesome.
And in 1836. No, 1868, redo that fucking shit again. 1868! 3668! Fuck me. Alright.